They say love can blind you, and that wealth can corrupt even the purest hearts. Madison Hayes learned this the hard way when she discovered her millionaire husband, Carter Reynolds, was leading a double life of lavish parties and secret affairs. Instead of confronting him in rage, she made an extraordinary move. She gave Carter permission to cheat. Yes, you heard that right. She let him indulge in his own moral collapse, never suspecting that behind her calm acceptance lay a stunning plan. In this shocking tale of betrayal, secrets, and revenge, you'll witness how one woman turned heartbreak into an unexpected triumph. Madison Hayes stood on the veranda of her opulent estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, staring into the shimmering lights of the city skyline. The estate was a monument to her husband, Carter Reynolds' vast empire Reynolds Industries, an empire he had painstakingly built from the ground up, albeit with considerable help from his influential family connections. Tall marble columns, sweeping gardens, a private lake, and a staff of 24 all testified to their astronomical wealth. Yet beneath the glossy veneer, Madison felt the first stirrings of disquiet. She was carrying their child, 3 months pregnant, and something about Carter felt off. Carter Reynolds was a tall, charismatic entrepreneur with connections that wove deep into the fabric of New York's business elite. With an Ivy League education from Princeton University and a father, Senator William Reynolds, who had served 2 terms in the United States Senate, Carter was groomed for greatness from birth. He had met Madison at a charity banquet 3 years prior, in a swirl of diamonds and tuxedos and well-rehearsed smiles. He was immediately enchanted by her sophistication, her intelligence, and her gentle nature, unlike the socialites he was used to. Within a year, they were married in a wedding that made headlines across major magazines. Real estate Prince Mary's rising architect Madison Bell. Madison's father, George Bell, was a private building contractor, a humble man who prided himself on the honesty of his work. He had always worried about his daughter entering Carter's high society world. But Madison was convinced that Carter's charm and philanthropic deeds were proof he had a kind, authentic heart. For the first year of marriage, everything seemed perfect. She designed the blueprint for their dream estate. He expanded Reynolds Industries globally. They balanced each other in a beautiful harmony, or so Madison believed. But soon, Carter's world tours for business became more frequent. He was hosting lavish parties on his yacht in Monaco. Strange credit card charges at 5-star hotels in foreign countries appeared. Late-night calls that Carter labeled business emergencies. Madison's initial suspicions turned into an annoying certainty. Carter was cheating. People whispered about him at posh luncheons or in hushed tones at private clubs, although never to her face due to her refined reputation. She heard a rumor once from a friend, Chloe Davis, a socially prominent philanthropist, who let slip that Carter had been spotted in St. Tropez with a young model draped on his arm. The rumor was quickly dismissed as tabloid gossip, but Madison felt the sting of truth. She confronted him one night, trembling with anger, but Carter was coyly dismissive, turning the question back on her. "Why can't you trust me?" He made her feel paranoid, insecure. Over time, Madison learned to push her suspicions deep down, plastering a poised smile in public. After all, the Reynolds name commanded respect, and if she aired her grievances without proof, she risked social ridicule and possibly jeopardizing her father's contracting business. Several Reynolds Industries affiliates were among his biggest clients. She felt locked in a golden cage. When Madison discovered she was pregnant, her emotions were conflicted. On one hand, she was excited to become a mother. On the other, she dreaded bringing a child into a marriage that seemed irretrievably broken. And yet, the Reynolds family was overjoyed. Senator William Reynolds, now retired from politics, gave a grand speech at the Reynolds family estate about how the Reynolds bloodline would continue. Carter toasted champagne with everyone and placed a protective hand on Madison's back, murmuring sweet nothings that almost made her believe him again. But the deception was laid bare when a young woman named Sophia Miller, a social media influencer, was caught on camera emerging from Carter's Manhattan penthouse while he was supposedly on a business trip in London. The paparazzi photos circulated in hush-hush fashion among the upper crust. They weren't publicly published, thanks to Reynolds' family power. Yet, these images made their way to Madison's friend circles. She saw them herself, her hands trembling as she pulled them from her purse in the privacy of a black SUV after a concerned friend discreetly passed them to her. The moment she saw Carter's unmistakable face next to Sophia's, everything crystallized. She was in her second trimester, a time that should have been filled with joy and celebration. Instead, she found herself sobbing into the embroidered pillows of their master suite. Eventually, the tears dried, replaced by a startling clarity. She recalled her mother, Laura Bell, who had once endured her own marriage to a man who cheated, and how that heartbreak had shaped Laura's quiet sadness. Madison refused to be a silent victim, but she also knew that going head-to-head with Carter Reynolds, a man whose wealth and legal connections were virtually limitless, would be akin to stepping into a battlefield armed with a toothpick. That was when a radical idea took root in her mind. What if I let him cheat? It sounded insane at first, but as Madison thought about it, she realized there was a twisted brilliance in giving him the rope to hang himself. If Carter believed he had free rein, perhaps he'd reveal his true nature. She consulted discreetly with an old law school friend, Noah Baker, a man who now ran a small but potent law firm in upstate New York. Noah listened in stunned silence as Madison outlined her plan. When she finished, he exhaled slowly. "This is unconventional," he said. "But if we handle this right, you'll have the leverage you need, both socially and legally." Madison spent several weeks working with Noah to draft a set of divorce papers so ironclad that Reynolds' own phalanx of attorneys would have difficulty untangling them. There was even a hidden clause that no Reynolds lawyer would anticipate a small but potent detail that could shift power entirely into Madison's hands. She sat with Noah and a few trusted paralegals, poring over every line, ensuring that if Carter Reynolds tried to discard her, he would walk away with minimal control over their child and face significant financial consequences. The next step was to set the stage. "I'll let him cheat freely," she thought, her heart pounding. "He won't know I'm watching, and by the time I drop these papers, it'll be too late." She felt a pang of guilt, wondering if she was stooping too low. But then she recalled the photos of Carter and Sophia and the numerous other rumors she had stifled. "No," she told herself, "this is survival." One sunny afternoon, Madison approached Carter in his private study, where he was on the phone, presumably with a client from Dubai. She waited patiently until he ended the call. He glanced at her with mild annoyance, but she steadied herself. "I think we need to talk," she said, wrapping her arms around her growing belly protectively. Carter raised an eyebrow, but offered a polite smile. "Of course, my dear. What's on your mind?" There was a slight tremor in her voice, but she spoke with surprising composure. "I realize I can't tie you down to a traditional marriage, if that's not what you want," she said. "I see how stressed you've been traveling, often entertaining important business partners. If you need an outlet, I won't stand in your way." He stared at her for a moment, confusion etched into his features. "Are you giving me permission to see other women?" he asked carefully. She shrugged, feigning indifference. "I'm pregnant, Carter. My focus is on the baby right now. I'd rather have honesty than illusions. If you need that sort of freedom, take it. Just don't lie to me about it." There was a silence thick with tension. Carter's mind was clearly whirring. He seemed caught off guard, torn between relief and suspicion. After all, what wife willingly condones her husband's infidelity? But perhaps a life free of guilt, free from having to hide, was appealing. Slowly, he nodded. "If that's what you want," he said softly. "Then, thank you, Madison. I appreciate your understanding." Madison forced a small smile, turning to leave. Inwardly, she felt revulsion and heartbreak, but she had to keep her mask on. The plan had begun. In the following weeks, Madison played the role of a beautiful wife who no longer asked about Carter's late nights, his questionable text messages, or the hush-hush phone calls he took in their expansive garden. She began to sleep in a separate room, citing that her pregnancy aches kept her tossing and turning all night. Carter didn't protest. In truth, it gave him the perfect cover to come home at odd hours without disturbing her. Sometimes Madison heard his footsteps at 3 o'clock in the morning. Other times, the staff quietly informed her that Carter hadn't returned all night. She responded with a serene wave of her hand. Oh, he's on a business trip, as though the behavior was perfectly normal. Meanwhile, her heart hammered in her chest each time, the magnitude of her emotional turmoil pressing down on her, but she always reminded herself, this is for the final act. Noah Baker guided her meticulously. Document what you can, he advised, but do it discreetly. Keep a private journal with dates, potential whereabouts. If you can gather any proof receipts, phone logs without tipping him off, do it. So, Madison became a quiet observer. She installed a minimal piece of monitoring software on Carter's personal computer, courtesy of an old colleague from her architectural tech firm. It was nothing invasive, just enough to see if suspicious emails turned up. She also took note of any receipts left behind. She didn't hack his accounts or do anything that might invite legal trouble for herself. She simply paid attention. Sure enough, the evidence piled up. Carter was frequenting a penthouse in Midtown where he'd host what he called client dinners. A few correspondences with women whose names Madison had never heard popped up in his email. He was spending thousands on extravagant gifts at high-end boutiques like Van Cleef & Arpels and Harry Winston. Madison quietly snapped photos of every sign of infidelity, storing them in a secret folder. She reminded herself that each piece of evidence was a stepping stone to her ultimate security. Carter's father, Senator William Reynolds, was not blind to his son's actions. He was a pragmatic, shrewd man who had navigated the murky waters of Washington, D.C. politics. Through the Reynolds family's private investigator, Marcus Jones, a retired FBI agent, William often kept tabs on Carter's activities. One day, William visited Madison unannounced, bearing a bouquet of roses for her and a solemn look in his eyes. She served him tea in the marble-tiled sunroom, trying to hide her growing unease. William was never one for idle chatter. After a few pleasantries about her health and the upcoming child, he leaned in. I know my son is straying, William said abruptly, his tone low. Madison froze, teacup halfway to her lips. She set it down gently. I see. My family's name has survived generations, he said with quiet fierceness. I will not allow scandal to ruin it. You are a Reynolds now. You must keep up appearances. Do you understand? She clenched her jaw, feeling a flash of anger. He doesn't care about my pain or the baby. He only cares about the Reynolds legacy. But she held her composure. Yes, I understand, she responded softly. I will keep up appearances. William nodded, seemingly satisfied. Good. I will speak to Carter. His gaze flickered to her belly. In the meantime, if you have any concerns about finances, let me know. You and the child should not suffer, regardless of Carter's decisions. Madison thanked him through gritted teeth. It dawned on her that even though William recognized Carter's indiscretions, he had no real intention of stopping his son. The Reynolds men covered for each other. She wondered if this pattern extended back through Reynolds' history, the men indulging themselves, the women forced to maintain the perfect facade. No more, she vowed internally. It ends with me. Around her 7th month of pregnancy, Madison discovered an unexpected ally. One of Carter's lovers, a woman named Emily Sutton, who hailed from the south of France. Emily was a jazz singer who performed regularly at an exclusive club in Manhattan. Madison found out about her through a conversation with the Reynolds house manager, who mentioned Carter had reserved a private lounge there. Compelled by a strange desire to see the other woman, Madison decided to attend a show incognito. She arrived in a simple black dress that didn't overly accentuate her pregnant belly, wearing a broad hat and large sunglasses. She slipped into the dimly lit club, just in time to see Emily sing. The woman's voice was mesmerizing, filled with sorrow and longing. Madison listened, tears burning her eyes. Is this the woman who has captured Carter's attention? The wave of jealousy and curiosity collided in her heart. After the performance, Madison braced herself and approached Emily backstage. She introduced herself as a curious listener, not revealing her true identity at first. Emily was gracious, offering a shy smile and a polite thank you. But Madison's composure faltered when she noticed a discreet diamond bracelet on Emily's wrist, the same one Madison had seen in a Reynolds Industries invoice last month. It was then that Madison lowered her voice. "I'm Carter Reynolds' wife," she said, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. Emily's eyes went wide with shock, and she dropped the water bottle she was holding. The plastic clattered to the floor, echoing in the narrow hallway. For a moment, Madison thought Emily would scream or lash out, but instead, the singer's shoulders sagged in defeat. She gestured for Madison to follow her into a small private dressing room. Once inside, Emily sank into a chair, pressed her hands to her temples. "You must hate me." Madison inhaled shakily. She felt an odd mixture of sadness and empathy. Emily didn't exude the cocky aura of a homewrecker. Instead, she seemed like just another woman trapped in Carter's orbit. "I don't hate you," Madison said quietly. "I just needed to see who he was spending time with." Emily confessed that Carter had pursued her months ago, showering her with gifts and promises. She had been led to believe his marriage was all but over, that Madison was some absentee wife. "I'm not proud," Emily murmured, tears glistening in her eyes. "But I was in a desperate situation financially. My mother needed surgery, and I had no one else to turn to. Carter made it easy." Hearing this, Madison realized that Carter's power extended even to the hearts of those struggling for survival. He exploited vulnerability. She wasn't alone in her victimhood. With a trembling hand, Madison took Emily's. "I'm sorry," she said. "I wish things were different." Before leaving, Madison left her personal cell number with Emily. "If you ever need to talk," she whispered, meaning it. As she walked out into the chilly Manhattan night, her heart felt unbearably heavy. She realized Carter wasn't just cheating out of lust. He also manipulated people. The moral lines became blurrier. Yet Madison's resolve to see her plan through only hardened. At 8 months pregnant, Madison was physically exhausted and emotionally drained. She had illusions of a loving husband who would rub her feet, indulge her midnight cravings, and make sure she felt cherished. Instead, she was playing puppet master to a man who was gallivanting around the city with multiple women. Her father, George Bell, noticed her stress, but she couldn't reveal the full extent of her scheme. She simply told him she was dealing with Carter's business woes. Nevertheless, some days proved too overwhelming. She almost called off her plan multiple times, nearly succumbing to a meltdown, but Noah Baker continued to reassure her, reminding her of the bulletproof divorce papers they had meticulously crafted. The hidden clause was crucial, a stipulation that if Carter was found to have engaged in extramarital affairs during her pregnancy, Madison would receive a controlling interest in Reynolds Industries shares set aside in a trust for the child. Carter had once made an offhand promise that our child will inherit Reynolds Industries one day. Madison had turned that notion into a contract clause that Reynolds' lawyers would likely overlook in the standard prenuptial agreement update. Noah's skill lay in merging older Reynolds trust documents with new language that Carter had casually initialed months prior. If he tried to fight her on it, the Reynolds family risked a massive scandal since the entire city would learn of the infidelity. That was the nuclear button. One late afternoon, Carter strolled into the house, reeking of expensive cologne and the faint scent of perfume that was not Madison's. She took a steadying breath and approached him with a gentle smile. "Carter, the baby will be here soon. The Reynolds lawyers are updating our estate documents. Something about inheriting the Reynolds fortune. They mentioned you need to sign a few papers. It's mostly standard procedure to align with Reynolds family protocols." She tried to keep the tremor out of her voice. He waved his hand dismissively. Sure. Just put it on my desk. I'll sign." She brought the folder the next day. The Reynolds' legal counsel typically would review everything, but his father was out of town, and Reynolds Industries' top attorney was currently busy negotiating a big merger overseas. Carter, too preoccupied with calls, simply flipped through pages, asked if Madison was sure everything was standard, and scrawled his signature in the designated spots. Madison stood there, nails digging into her palms, trying to hide the tremor in her breathing. It's done, she thought. The day Madison went into labor was both terrifying and oddly hopeful. She was rushed to the hospital in the Reynolds family's personal limousine. Carter was at his Midtown penthouse, but arrived at the hospital shortly after, looking unexpectedly anxious. Through the painful contractions, Madison noted the worry etched on his face, a fleeting thought. Does he actually care? But the question vanished amidst the agony of labor. After 10 excruciating hours, Madison gave birth to a baby girl they named Grace. The moment Madison heard Grace's first cry, her heart flooded with an indescribable mixture of love, relief, and heartbreak for what might have been if Carter had truly been a devoted husband. Carter held the baby, eyes brimming with tears. He looked at Madison, and for a heartbeat, she thought she saw genuine love in his gaze. He bent down, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Thank you," he whispered, voice cracking. The swirl of emotions in Madison's chest threatened to overwhelm her. She allowed herself a few minutes of believing this was a new beginning. Maybe Carter would turn over a new leaf and be the father Grace deserved. Over the next week, Carter played the role of a doting father, bringing Madison gourmet meals, helping the nurses, fussing over Grace's every whimper. For a brief time, Madison basked in the illusion. But illusions have a way of shattering. On the night Madison returned home, as she was tending to Grace, she heard Carter speaking on the phone in the adjacent study. His tone was low, urgent. "Darling, yes, I know. Look, it was just the baby. You know, I had to be there. We'll go to Milan next week. Don't worry. I'll handle Madison." Madison's hand froze midair, pressing a soft towel to Grace's face. He's still planning a trip with some other woman. All at once, the ephemeral hope she'd allowed herself to feel disintegrated. She swallowed the lump in her throat and kissed the top of her newborn's head, tears gliding down her cheeks. "I've done all I can. Now I protect my child and me." 2 days later, Carter strolled into the mansion's sprawling living room. He was on another call, presumably finalizing travel arrangements. Madison sat on the plush sofa, arms folded, her expression resolute. She had a manila envelope in her lap. When Carter ended his call, she cleared her throat. "I have something for you," she said, offering him the envelope. Inside, at the top, were the divorce papers, 10 neatly printed pages with Noah Baker's firm's logo. Carter's face blanched. "What is this?" he demanded, rifling through the sheets. "Divorce," Madison said calmly, though her heart hammered in her chest. "I'm done pretending this is a marriage. You can keep your affairs. I won't stand in your way. I only want what's fair for me and our daughter." He shot her a stunned look. "You agreed. I agreed not to fight you about your lifestyle," Madison interjected, voice icy. "But I never said I'd remain your wife under these circumstances. Now that Grace is here, I refuse to live under your shadow." His lips curled in disdain. "Fine," he said, throwing the papers onto the marble coffee table. "If you want a divorce, you'll leave with the clothes on your back. Our prenup is ironclad." Madison smirked, her eyes flinty. "You might want to actually read the terms this time." He snatched up the documents again, flipping through them with increasing panic. Then he saw the hidden clause, the one referencing the Reynolds Trust inheritance and the controlling interest in Reynolds Industries. If an extramarital affair was documented, the details were spelled out with clarity. If Carter was found at fault for infidelity during her pregnancy or the child's first year, Madison could claim a sizable share of Reynolds Industries' assets on behalf of Grace, effectively giving Madison controlling power over Carter's stake should she choose to exercise it. She had it in writing that Carter had acknowledged fatherhood and pledged unwavering fidelity during pregnancy and the child's infancy. His signature was right there with the Reynolds notary stamp. Carter's cheeks flushed scarlet. "You, how dare you trap me like this?" Madison rose, crossing her arms. "You gave me no choice. I only secured our future. A man who cheats on his pregnant wife is someone who can't be trusted. I had to protect myself and our daughter." He looked ready to erupt. "I'll call my lawyers. We'll fight this in court." She shrugged. "Go ahead. If we go to court, everything will come out. The mistress in St. Tropez, the nights at your penthouse, the receipts, the phone records, the gifts. And trust me, I have proof. Do you really want the Reynolds name dragged through tabloids? Your father might have political connections, but even he can't bury a scandal of this magnitude. Carter's face contorted with fury, then twisted with defeat. He realized the precarious position. Reynolds Industries had several pending deals with major international partners. A scandal could cause stock prices to plummet, tarnish the Reynolds brand, and incite a media circus. "You, cunning," he began, then stopped himself, inhaling raggedly. Madison felt both triumph and sorrow in that moment. "I never wanted this," she thought bitterly. "But you forced my hand." She steeled herself. "We can settle this quietly," she offered, her voice steady. "Sign the divorce. I'll take custody of Grace. You can have visitation, but Reynolds Industries remains partially under my control for our daughter's sake until she's of age. You can avoid a public battle, and we can both move on." Carter sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. She watched him, her heart pounding. For all his cruelty, for all the heartbreak, seeing him so defeated tugged at a shred of her humanity. But then she remembered his phone call about Milan, the hush-hush dinners, the tears she'd shed alone in bed, and she felt only resolve. The Reynolds estate, once a symbol of untouchable power and legacy, now stood like a fortress under siege. The walls had witnessed decades of whispered deals, polished diplomacy, and silent betrayals, but now they echoed with the tension of a family imploding from within. It didn't take long for news of the divorce settlement to reach Senator William Reynolds. Despite all efforts to keep the matter quiet, someone from the legal team had leaked just enough to stir whispers within the business elite. That was all it took. Within days, William had a printed copy of the revised estate and trust documents in hand, and fury coursing through his veins. One morning, without warning, he arrived at Madison's townhouse. He didn't knock politely. He pounded on the door with the authority of a man who had once commanded votes in the U.S. Senate. Madison opened the door, Grace balanced on her hip. "We need to talk," William barked. She looked him over coolly, then stepped aside. "Keep your voice down. Your granddaughter is sleeping." He stepped into the living room like a storm in human form. His gaze swept across the minimal, tasteful decor with a kind of disdain. This wasn't the opulence of the Reynolds estate, but it had warmth, something money couldn't buy. "I want answers," William said, turning to face her. "You slipped a clause into the Reynolds Trust. You now control part of the company. That was never agreed upon." Madison met his stare without flinching. "It was agreed upon the moment your son signed those documents. He had every opportunity to read them. He didn't. That's not my fault." His jaw tightened. "You took advantage." "No," she said calmly. "I protected my daughter. Something your son refused to do when he was flying to Milan with another woman during my pregnancy." William's lips pressed into a hard, bloodless line. "You're threatening Reynolds Industries." "I'm protecting my family," she corrected. "And if this goes to court, I have more than enough evidence to back every claim." He threw the papers on her coffee table. "This is extortion." "No," she replied, voice even, eyes steady. "This is justice." For a moment, they stood in silence. Then William, the ever-calculated patriarch, recalibrated, his voice lowered. "What do you want, Madison? Money? A quiet settlement? We can arrange that." Madison let out a dry laugh. "I already have settlement. I want stability for Grace. I want Reynolds Industries to fund the community projects Carter promised, and I want you to stop treating me like I'm disposable." He looked at her for a long time. Something shifted in his eyes. Not acceptance, but acknowledgement. He had underestimated her gravely. "I see now why Carter fell for you," he said at last. "You're smarter than you look." "I'm smarter than you think," she replied sharply. "That's your real mistake." He stood there for a moment longer, seething behind a brittle veneer of diplomacy. Then he gave a curt nod. "We'll be in touch," he said, turning toward the door. Madison followed him out and watched as he disappeared into the waiting town car, the door slamming shut with finality. Later that evening, Carter called. His voice was flat. "My father's furious." "I gathered," Madison replied, rocking Grace gently in her arms. "He thinks you're trying to destroy the company. I'm trying to ensure it doesn't destroy our daughter's future." There was a pause. "I'm sorry," Carter said again, quieter this time. "I didn't read the documents. I should have, but I was distracted. With other things, she finished for him. That's the story of our marriage. Silence. Madison shifted Grace to her other shoulder, kissed her tiny forehead. The damage is done, Carter. I'm not trying to punish you, but I won't let Grace be raised by men who think women are pawns to move around a board. You have my word, he said finally. I won't challenge the clause. You better not, she said, voice steel. Because this time I won't just fight. I'll win. When she ended the call, Madison stared out the window, the sky awash in soft gold as the sun began to set. The Reynolds empire was still standing, but the foundation had cracked, and she had done it without raising her voice, without threats, just with the truth. And truth, she'd learned, was the most devastating weapon of all. The weeks after the settlement were calm on the surface, but emotionally volatile beneath. Madison moved through each day with a practiced grace, but inside, she remained on high alert. The Reynolds family might have signed the documents, but their history of control and silent retaliation lingered in her mind like smoke that refused to clear. She was careful. She double-checked every transaction, secured Grace's documents in a private safety deposit box, and ensured all custody schedules were filed through official channels. No verbal agreements, no casual promises, everything documented. She had learned the hard way that trust, when broken, doesn't easily rebuild. Then one morning, her phone rang. It was a name she hadn't seen in weeks, Emily Sutton. The jazz singer's voice was hushed, tinged with hesitation. Madison? I heard. About the settlement. About the trust clause. Madison tightened her grip on the phone. You heard correctly. There was a pause. Then Emily's voice softened. I want to help if you still need me. I have messages, recordings. I don't want anything from you. I just want to be part of the truth. Madison sat down on the armrest of her couch, surprised by the sincerity. Emily, you don't owe me anything. But I owe myself the closure, Emily replied gently. And I owe it to every woman who's ever been manipulated by someone like Carter. If there's ever a trial, or if things flare up again, I'll testify. For a moment, Madison said nothing. She felt a deep, unexpected swell of gratitude. Not pity, just mutual recognition. Thank you, she said at last. I hope we don't need it. But knowing you're willing means more than you know. Emily exhaled through the line. Take care of that, little girl. Madison nodded. I will. That conversation stayed with her, not because of what Emily offered, but because it reminded her of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Solidarity. Then, just as the rhythm of her new life began to settle, another unexpected moment arrived. It was a rainy Wednesday. Madison was reviewing a proposal for a small public library renovation project when the intercom at her townhouse buzzed. She wasn't expecting anyone. Who is it? She asked, pressing the speaker. A familiar voice crackled through. It's me, Carter. Her heart skipped, then hardened. What do you want? 5 minutes. Please. Against her better judgment, but fueled by curiosity, Madison allowed him in. When he appeared in her foyer, soaked from the rain despite the umbrella, she almost didn't recognize him. Not because of his appearance, but because of the absence of arrogance. His shoulders drooped. His eyes were tired. He stepped inside hesitantly, glancing around at the modest but warm home she'd created. Grace was napping in her nursery. Say what you came to say, Madison said. Carter took a breath. I've been thinking about everything, about who I was, and who I still might be. She crossed her arms. Go on. I've stepped back from Reynolds Industries, he said quietly. My father's furious, but I needed space. I've enrolled in a nonprofit leadership course. I want to try something different. I want to help, not just build more wealth. Madison's expression didn't change, but inside, a flicker of disbelief registered. Carter, stepping away from Reynolds. It sounded impossible. You expect applause? She asked, more to test him than mock him. No, he said. I expect you to doubt me, but I'm not here to ask for your forgiveness. I'm here to ask if I can still be part of Grace's life. His voice cracked. I don't want to be a footnote in her childhood. Madison studied him. His sincerity seemed real. But how long would it last? That depends on you, she said. If you want visitation, stick to the schedule. If you show up late, If you miss dates, if you bring us chaos, the agreement warrants changes. He nodded quickly. Understand. And don't you dare bring your distractions, your other lives, into hers. I won't, he said. I want to be better. There was again that flicker of remorse. Madison wasn't ready to forgive, but she could allow space for growth. Not for him, for Grace. Then earn it, she said. They stood in silence for a moment. Can I see her? He asked, voice soft. Madison hesitated. Then she nodded. She led him down the hall to the nursery, where Grace lay in her crib, a soft mobile spinning above her. Carter stepped inside slowly, as if entering a sacred space. He gazed down at his daughter, awestruck. His hand hovered over the crib's edge, but didn't touch. She's beautiful, he whispered. So much like you. Madison said nothing. She let the moment speak. As he looked down, a tear slipped from his eye. Madison watched, unsure if it was guilt, regret, or something else. Maybe all of it. I'll let myself out, he said finally. Thank you for letting me see her. She followed him to the door, but didn't say goodbye. She just nodded. After he left, Madison returned to Grace's crib, staring at her sleeping daughter. The world was still uncertain. But one thing was clear, Madison had changed. She was no longer waiting to be rescued, redeemed, or repaired by someone else's actions. She was her own compass now, and she would protect Grace with the same ferocity that had gotten her through every betrayal. In this life, there were no more surprises that could unmake her, because now she was unshakable. The formalities were done, but the emotional residue lingered like a storm that had passed without fully clearing the skies. Madison left the Reynolds Industries legal building with Grace cradled in her arms and the finalized divorce settlement tucked in her leather folder, a symbol of both closure and survival. Outside, the world continued like nothing had changed. But for Madison, everything had. That evening, she sat alone in her townhouse's living room, watching Grace sleep in her bassinet. The baby's chest rose and fell with soft, rhythmic breaths, oblivious to the empire her mother had just wrestled part of away from deceit and control. Madison ran her fingers over the edge of the signed agreement, letting herself breathe deeply for the first time in months. It was more than a legal document. It was her emancipation. The trust clause had held. Despite their resistance, Reynolds Industries' attorneys had no choice but to accept the consequences. With Carter's signature and the timeline of his documented affairs, Madison had secured partial control over a Reynolds trust set aside for their daughter. In practical terms, it meant she held a voice in key decisions. In symbolic terms, it meant she had stood toe-to-toe with one of the most powerful families in the Northeast and walked away with her dignity intact. Carter hadn't spoken much after the signing. His silence was not of defiance, but of quiet resignation. Whatever power he had once wielded over Madison had been dismantled piece by her quiet persistence. Later that week, Carter sent a message through his assistant a request to meet Grace outside the scheduled visitation. Madison declined, not out of spite, but because she needed space. She had given him enough chances. He would see their daughter when agreed upon, no more, no less. Senator William Reynolds, ever the strategist, also kept his distance. His fury had cooled into reluctant acceptance. The last email he sent Madison was unusually brief. You handled yourself with skill. The board respects results. We'll move forward. It wasn't an apology, but it was acknowledgement, and that was more than she ever expected. In the weeks that followed, Madison's phone rang frequently, not from social calls, but from professionals now intrigued by her resilience. A former Harvard classmate offered to partner with her on a municipal housing project. An architectural journal reached out for a profile interview. Even a real estate investor she'd once met at a gala inquired about funding her firm's next expansion. For the first time in years, Madison was no longer seen as Carter Reynolds' wife. She was Madison Bell, an architect, a mother, and a woman who'd rewritten the rules of survival. She stood by the window one morning, Grace gurgling in a playpen nearby, and watched the sun rise over the rooftops of Greenwich. It cast a warm golden hue across the floorboards, lighting the room with quiet promise. The settlement had ended her marriage. but it had also given birth to something else entirely, a new beginning. The news of the divorce broke quietly, released through a meticulously worded statement from the Reynolds family's PR team. After much reflection, Madison and Carter Reynolds have mutually decided to part ways due to irreconcilable differences. Their focus remains on co-parenting their daughter, Grace, with love and respect. The public bought it. Investors breathed a sigh of relief, grateful that Reynolds Industries hadn't spiraled into scandal. Behind the sanitized language, however, was a woman rebuilding her life from the ashes of deception and a man reckoning with the legacy of his choices. Madison didn't seek the spotlight. She let the media frenzy fade while channeling her energy into raising Grace. Her days were now filled with lullabies and architectural sketches, diaper changes, and client consultations. The whirlwind of betrayal had passed, leaving clarity in its wake. She was no longer a pawn in someone else's empire. She was the architect of her own. With the divorce settlement finalized and the trust clause intact, Madison launched her own firm, Bell Design. It was a tribute to her father's integrity and her own rebirth. She didn't need the Reynolds name to succeed. Her talent and resilience would carry her forward. Her father, George, stood proudly by her side, helping with everything from client outreach to babysitting Grace. "You've got this, kiddo," he often said, handing her blueprints while rocking his granddaughter. His steady presence reminded her that not all men abandoned their families. Some stood tall, no matter the storm. Carter, for his part, honored the visitation terms. His appearances were predictable but subdued. He brought plush toys and rare baby books, always dressed impeccably, and trying in his awkward way to make up for what he'd lost. Madison remained cordial, though never unguarded. Her boundaries were firm. Grace came first, always. A few months after the dust settled, Carter surprised her. He arrived unannounced at the Bell Design office one rainy afternoon, looking uncharacteristically unsure. Madison, startled but composed, led him to the conference room. "I needed to see you," he said, voice quieter than she remembered. "I wanted to say I'm sorry." She sat across from him, expression unreadable. "I was blind," he continued. "I didn't realize what I had until I destroyed it. You were always more than I deserved." Madison didn't rush to respond. She studied his face, the once smug entitlement now replaced with traces of humility. For a moment, she saw not the man who betrayed her, but a man finally confronting his own reflection. "I appreciate you saying that," she replied, voice even. "But the damage is done." Carter nodded slowly. "I'm stepping back from Reynolds Industries for a while. My father thinks I'm being foolish, but I need to figure out who I am outside of the money, the pressure, the expectations." There was a pause. "I've been thinking about doing more philanthropic work, something with substance." A flicker of emotion crossed Madison's face. "I hope you do," she said. "For Grace's sake, if nothing else." They sat in silence, broken only by the faint patter of rain against the windows. When Carter finally stood, he looked down at her one last time. "Are you happy?" It wasn't a question she'd considered in full. She thought of Grace's laugh, the peaceful mornings, her firm slowly taking shape. She smiled small, real. "I'm getting there." And with that, he left. No grand gestures, no pleas for forgiveness, just the quiet, reluctant departure of a man who had finally accepted the consequences of his actions. Years later, Madison Bell stood not on the veranda of an opulent estate, but on the balcony of her own award-winning architectural firm, Bell Design Group. Below, the city hummed, a vibrant tapestry she had helped weave with her innovative, community-focused structures. Grace, now a bright young woman on the cusp of college, stood beside her, a hand on her mother's arm. "Your community center in Brooklyn just won another national award, Mom," Grace said, her eyes shining with pride. "They're dedicating the new wing to you." Carter Reynolds had indeed found a different path. He'd poured his energy and a significant portion of his remaining wealth into philanthropic endeavors, focusing on urban renewal and educational programs, often collaborating at a respectful distance with Projects Madison designed through the Reynolds Foundation's charitable arm. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet dedication. He was a consistent, loving father to Grace, and over time, a fragile but genuine respect had formed between him and Madison. They weren't friends, not in the conventional sense, but they were effective co-parents, united by their love for their daughter. He'd even remarried, a kind woman who understood his past and supported his present efforts. Madison sometimes saw Emily Sutton, whose jazz career had soared internationally. They'd share a knowing smile if their paths crossed at a charity event, a silent acknowledgement of a shared, difficult past and their individual, hard-won triumphs. Emily had once sent Madison a card, simply saying, "Thank you for showing me that strength can be quiet and that we define our own worth." As the sun dipped below the skyline, painting it in hues of orange and purple, Madison felt a profound sense of peace. She had not only survived, she had rebuilt, redefined, and reclaimed her life, creating a legacy of strength, integrity, and compassion for Grace to inherit. Her triumph wasn't just in outmaneuvering a powerful family. It was in building a life filled with purpose, genuine joy, and the unwavering love of her daughter, all on her own terms. The hidden clause had been her key, but her spirit had been the architect of her true freedom. Her story is a testament that sometimes life's greatest victories emerge from our darkest trials. Madison learned this when she boldly allowed Carter to betray her in the open, all while meticulously preparing her escape route. Though their marriage crumbled, she forged a new path, one free from deception and secured by a clause that gave her real power. In the end, she showed us that a painful betrayal doesn't have to define your future. It can become the catalyst for unimaginable strength and rebirth. If you found this story moving, please don't forget to like this video, share it with friends who need a lesson in resilience, and subscribe to our channel for more riveting tales of love, loss, and triumph. Your support helps us continue bringing you stories that reveal the hidden depths of the human spirit. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the boldest moves come from the quietest hearts.